So the first part of this testing introduction, we spoke about a lot of things. Let's go back and see what we spoke about. We first created a unit test, or we added unit testing to our project. We created a new Xcode project. We selected add unit test to it. That gave us a new target. It gave us the challenge calculator test target. In here, we created multiple tests. We created our first test was just test add two numbers, right? We created a test to calculate the weekly training of the user. The user puts in some expected challenge, in that case, 11,000 feet of climbing. And we have an expected average here based on the number of weeks the user has until they achieve their goal. We set up our testing suite, our unit test, with an arrange block, an act block. Act is where you actually call the function to be tested. And we have an assert block, where you actually have an assert. It could be assert equal. It could be assert greater than or equal to. So this is where we actually have our assert function getting called. And we also created a test to test the average metric per week or for the day for that user. So now let's wire all that up together for our UI. So for people who want to go ahead and start it off, this is the UI for the application. We have a basic segmented control. We have distance, elevation. We have two text fields. We have two labels, three labels. We have a button where the user clicks on that button and we calculate a new challenge, right? We won't make use of UI text field delegate or anything like that. This is a simple UI just to make sure our functions are working as intended. We've tested our functions, so we know they're working. Right now, we're just wiring up the UI with the functions, okay? Cool. So let's go ahead and do that. Go to storyboard. Text field, no text view here. So first I'll grab a segmented control. Beach ball again. I missed my MacBook Pro 16-inch. Return to sender. What was that? Yeah, I need 2 more cores. And also there was like a bug I saw last week on it.
Usually your character has 2 more cores.
2 more what?
2 more cores.
2 more cores. Wow. Okay. I need to close my Xcode, guys. Sorry.
Xcode.
I told you I need more cores. But seriously, this has been the buggiest one.
It's pretty bad. We've had several problems that were just like it wasn't registering. Like changes made is like a big thing.
Yeah.
And you have to exit Xcode, but like that's not always my first guess. It's like exit Xcode, but like
And then
it's starting to become my go-to.
And then the simulator and all that stuff. It's not a friendly Xcode, especially for beginners. They're like, is that what I have to deal with? Okay, so we have, let me try that again. Segmented control, go where you want to go, sir. All right, great. Finally, I got my segmented control. Okay, so segmented control, let's set up the constraints to that real quickly. I go to add constraints for my segmented control. I'll add it 40 to the top, add 1 constraint. I'll center it horizontally. So center horizontally. $40 to the top. And for my first constraint, I'll say elevation here. For the first title, say elevation. And double click on the second segmented control and make it distance. Two constraints. One is 40 to the top, and the second one is horizontally centered. What else we have going? Next up, we have a text field. The text field is basically 20, 20, and 20. So 20 to the top, 22 leading, 22 trailing. So go ahead and drag in a text field. Let's put some placeholder text for our text field. Actually, let's set the constraints first. So add new constraints for the text field. Add new constraints for the text field. And we said 20 to the top or to the bottom of my segmented control, 20 leading and 20 trailing. So I have 3 constraints. Let's add some placeholder text for our text field. I'll say enter metric, example, elevation, distance, challenge. I'll center it. So we added a placeholder text for our text field. Enter metric, example, elevation, distance, challenge. And I centered it, so alignment is center. Awesome. Next up, we have our label. So metric, elevation, distance, drag in a label. Label, right in the center here. I drag my trailing label to my trailing text field, leading label to leading text field. I'll center my label. And for the label, we'll say metric, elevation, distance, enter. Yeah. Actually 8, make it whatever the default is to, we want to make it as close as possible to the bottom of the text field. So I think that value might be 8. So go to add new constraints and make it 8, the bottom of the text field. So 8 here, and 20 leading and 20 trailing. That's for the label, okay? And go ahead and add 3 constraints. Great. So at this point, we could actually option click. Option click those 2 values because they're very identical. I'll remove the constraints on my metric here. I'll move the constraints on my label. And the placeholder is different. So the placeholder for the second text field will be enter number of weeks. So placeholder, control drag, no control drag. Select the 2 fields. Select whatever element you want to drag, you want to copy, and option click to copy it. Cool. Yeah, both of them, because both of them have the text field and the label. Remove the constraints. So go to reset constraints and clear the constraints. On the original? On the, not the original, the new ones you brought in. The original still has its constraints, but the new ones you brought in will add new constraints for them. Cool? Okay, so the second placeholder, let's add in some placeholder here. So enter number of weeks for challenge. Cool. That's centered already, that's great. And for my label name, this is going to be simply number of weeks. Cool. Let's set constraints now. Constraints for my text field, the second one. Let's set that up. We'll say 40. 20 is fine, 20 is fine. 20 from the bottom of my label, 20 to the lead-in, 20 to the trailing. 3 constraints. And next up, the label. So the label will be 8. 8 to the bottom of my enter number of weeks text field. 20 to the lead-in, 20 to the trailing. I'll pause here and make sure that we're all on board. So far we have how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Our first segmented control, we set it to like 40 from the top. Feel free to use numbers you want. All right. Next up, what do we have? We have a button and a label. So go ahead, grab a button, sorry. It's a button, not a bar button item, just a button, a regular button. Regular button. And I'll say calculate challenge. We'll set the constraint for the button. Add new constraints. Zoom in here. We'll make it 40 from the bottom of my number of weeks. We'll make it, no, that's it, that's all we need. So 1 constraint, and we'll add a center horizontal constraint. So click on my button again, go to align constraints, and horizontally in container. Okay. Last, we'll get a label. This will actually show the user the average for the week. So here we'll say average metric for the week. And let's set the constraints for this one. Add new constraints. 20. 20 from the lead-in, and 20 from the trailing. That's our last element. And make sure to center it. So click on the last label and center it. While we're still typing, not typing, but setting up our UI, I'll open up my assistant editor. Open up the assistant editor, and let's go ahead and drag our elements to our view controller. First, let's get the segmented control. So control drag your segmented control over to your view controller. Let's just call it segmented control. Segmented control is of type UI segmented control. Click connect. Next up, we have the metric text field. That's where the user enters whether it's elevation or distance. So control drag from your text field. First text field is called metric text field. Then we have number of weeks text field. Number of weeks text field. Great. And lastly, for our outlets, we have the message label. Control drag message label. We'll call this message label. We'll collect the button now. So let's go ahead and the button is an action. Yeah, so we'll connect an action for the button as Amini says. So we'll control drag from the button and create an action for it. And it depends on what you want to do with the button. If I want to change the color or anything I want to change as far as like the attributes of a button, I would need an outlet to it. So here I have my button and I'm going to say calculate challenge pressed and press enter here. So as far as our UI goes, that's about it here. So we could actually close our assistant editor. Once you're done, you can close your assistant editor. For the message label is connected to the last label at the bottom. So we have 4 elements. We have the segmented, we have 2 text fields, and we have the message label, the very last one. And the button, don't forget to connect the button. The button is an action. How are we doing? Good? Okay. Cool. So let's close our assistant editor, go back to our view controller, and let's write some more logic here to make everything work. Cool. So first of all, let's create a variable here. We'll call it, well, before I create a variable, we have 2 states. Whenever we see states, what should come up to our minds? We have states we want to control. What comes? An enum, right? According to Christian here, an enum. So we have 2 states. We have, what are the states? Distance and elevation, right? So we'll create an enum for it. States is one way you could call it, but I'll call it challenge type so it reads better. Because you want your code to be self-documented, right? When you say state, the person asks what kind of state, like what state, right? But if you say challenge type, it kind of says what it is, right? Like what challenge type are you doing? Is it elevation challenge? Is it a distance challenge? Later we could have more challenges that we add here. Maybe it's a coding challenge. Okay, no takers here. All right, so we have distance and we have elevation. Those are states that we control. Great. So we'll start off by having a variable here called current challenge. What's our first? Most times you'll see code like that if the enum directly affects that class and only affects that class. If it affects anything else in the code, like apart from that particular class, you could have it in its own file. But for purposes of what we're doing here, it only affects this view controller.
So that's what I'm asking. Not that it's not within the class itself. It could be.
Yeah, it could be outside. I could create a new file, call it challenge type.
Yeah.
Yeah, and have more logic in there. Maybe I have an instance method doing something. Cool? Okay, let me. So current challenge is what? Current challenge is of type challenge type. What's our first segmented? It's the elevation, correct? All right. So we'll make it. We'll default it to that elevation. And anytime we toggle between elevation and distance, we want to change what the label looks like. Okay? So the label will no longer say, for example, if it's distance, we say miles. If it's elevation, we say feet. But keep in mind, this is not good production code. When I say production code, you're not going to ship an app hard coding miles in there. Everybody with me? This is only for the purpose of what we're doing right now. Ideally, distance will have its own enum, right? Of many distances, right? Or whatever distance the user wants to add. Kilometers, miles, yards, whatever, right? Everybody? Cool. All right. So here we have did set. We'll have a to do here. We'll have some function called calculate. We'll have a calculate. No. Um, yes. Instead of like saying hard-coded miles, which we'll do now, would have like, just know that that app would have more pieces to it, right? It wouldn't just say miles or feet, right? Because if you're in Europe, you're like, what's feet, right? That kind of thing. Like we're still battling, right? And we still want to go to Mars and look for other people. We can't even get along. Feet, distance, inches, right? All that stuff. All right, so here we have our current challenge. Great, great, great. Let's create a current challenge method. So here, let me stop here for a second. We've been doing testing, right? This is where, as a developer, you need to start saying, what code can I test in my view controller, right? It's harder to test my calculate challenge pressed button or function, right? So I'm gonna write a helper function. I could test that helper function very easily in my view controller, right? It's gonna be harder for me to test the code in the calculate challenge pressed. I have to like show, I have to do some UI testing to make the user press on the button. Everybody see where I'm going with that? It's harder to test it. I have to put UI testing in, so I have to click on the button and then see what action happens. But if I take a function and I put it directly out here, I could test that function in my UI code, in my unit testing. I could test this particular function. That function will simply say calculate challenge. Okay. What does calculate challenge do? So calculate challenge press, first of all, calls calculate challenge. And now I could call calculate challenge different places. I could call calculate challenge when the user presses on the button. Where else can I call calculate challenge? In my did set right here, I could call calculate challenge, right? If I had all my code in the challenge button pressed, I can call it. Everybody see where I'm going with that, right? So now you want to modularize your code, break your code apart such that calculate challenge is a function, it's a block of code, going back to functions, unit 1. It's a block of code I could call anywhere in my program. And now I could test it in my test suite. I'll show you guys how to test view controllers soon, but I could test my view controller, call my calculate challenge, pass it some parameters, and be good. Cool? So really think of how can I test? Can I test this function? Is it testable? Okay, so here, let's keep going. So we'll use some guard statements here. So first we need to get the metric. Yeah, we want to change the text. The message label. So if it says 2,000 feet, it wouldn't say 2,000 feet if I go to distance. It would say miles. Simple, but that's what we wanted to do. So we want to get the metric and the number of days from the text fields. Okay. We'll use our friend guard. We just love guard, right? Guard is just it's great. It's a beautiful thing. So here we'll say we need a metric. How do we get a metric? A metric is what? An integer. If we look back at our function, what does our function need? Our function needs an int, well, not this one. Our function needs a double and an int. So we need to get those values. So we need a double and an int. So our metric will say double here. What are we getting? We're getting the metric text field. Metric text field dot text. It's an optional. We'll use nil coalescing. We'll pass in an empty string. This is the first guy. So here we have a metric. Again, the power of guard. We unwrapped our text field. It has a string. And we take that string and we're making a double out of it using the double initializer. Everybody? Stop me here if we have any questions. Any questions? We're doing two things here. First, we're unwrapping our text field because text is optional. And we're initializing it as a double. We're using cast in there to get a double, because metric should be a double. Everybody with me? Okay, so let's keep going. Next we have our number of weeks. Number of weeks is an integer. So very similar to what we did there, except that we're going to be doing an integer. We wrap it as an integer. And here we have number of, I need 10 cores. Number of weeks. Text field, that text. This. Great. And here we say else. We really don't want to crash here, but for now I'll say return because we don't want to crash the app if the user didn't enter the correct things. And I'll put to do best to present an alert controller to the user. You guys have seen like alerts, right? Like if you do something, right? That's what I'm talking about. I'm not going to show it right now, but that's the best practice there. You don't want to crash the app if the user doesn't put in a valid parameter, right? You want to present something. So here we'll just like put a print statement for now. Something like that, but more like an alert to the user, like, hey, you're missing something. So here I'll just say missing required fields. Cool. So we have everything we need. Let's go ahead and create a challenge. This is very similar to the code we wrote, by the way, in all the tests we write. We have a challenge. And we said weekly training, this is what we get back. Our function returns the average weekly training we need to do based on the challenge. So here challenge, and our function is called calculate weekly training. We pass in our metric here, and we pass in number of weeks. That, great. And now we have all that. We'll switch based on the current, segment. Based on the current segment that's selected, we'll switch on it because we have that value. So we'll say switch, let me put some comments in here. So switch on the current selected segment in our segmented control, right? So if the user selected elevation, you want to show them feet. If they selected distance, you want to show them miles. And again, keep in mind that those are hard-coded numbers. Ideally, you want the user, like in settings somewhere, right? Maybe we'll come back to that app later to show us how to do settings with a table view controller. But in settings somewhere, the user could change what metric they want, right? Okay, cool. So we have switch to user. So let's switch on current challenge. And here we say case it's distance. Let's start with elevation. We have elevation first. Case elevation, we'll do some code. Case distance, we'll do some code. Awesome. Looking good. So for elevation, what we want to do, we want to say message label dot text equal to weekly training. Weekly training. Use some string interpolation to interpolate our weekly training parameter here. Great, this is it. We're not going to copy paste here. We could have a function doing that, but that's just one line for now. Weekly, or we could do a ternary, we could do a lot of things here. Weekly training. Oh, we're missing one. Hey, come on. Whoa. Weekly training. And here, if it's elevation, we say feet, right? And here, if it's distance, we say miles. And please keep in mind, feet and miles are hard-coded here. Ideally, those would be in user settings, right, of the app. How many people, have you guys used Strava or anything like that? Strava, right? So in Strava, you could go there, you could toggle kilometers or whatever. There was a bug there where you had to like kill the app and come back. But ideally, when the user changes it, it should just automatically update. If I was doing feet earlier and I want to go to kilometers, it should just update automatically. Cool? That's what I'm talking about there. When we go into Unit 4, we'll see what that looks like. Great. So now we have enough to test. We have enough to test. We write everything. Look at that. We don't even need view load today. Crazy. You could actually take out view load. We're not doing anything in view load. Let's run our app and see if it works as advertised. So run it. A default. Why don't we need a default? So Jahid was asking, we don't need a default for current challenge. Why don't we need a default? Not because it's an enum. If you go back to your enum, right, there's only two cases, right? And it's not like an int, it's not a raw value type int where you say case 0, 3, 4, whatever it is, right? There's two cases, it's finite, right? Wow, small iPhone. Okay, so we have our app, it's running. Let's test it out. Let's test it out with the actual numbers we had. Anybody could go to the test and see what numbers we have? We don't have the what? We cannot enter anything? You could. If anything, we could change the keyboard type. Actually, let's change the keyboard type. I don't like the keyboard type. Yeah. Let's change the keyboard type to numbers and punctuation. So go to your go to storyboard, go to your text field, and go to. Do we see keyboard type here? On any of your text fields, do you see keyboard type in Attributes Inspector? So change keyboard type from default to numbers and punctuation for both of them. So both should be numbers and punctuation. Can you build again? Maybe your challenge, is your challenge not part of your target? It sounds like it's not part of your target. I'll come over and see what you have going on. It might not be part of the target. Let me just come and take a look at it. Just run the app command on. It's just running? It's slow. It run, right? Let's do it together and we'll verify what else is going wrong. So, okay, so run your app again. Was anybody, let me get my second screen here. Nobody is, I want to test the exact thing we had to verify that we are good. Okay, so our app is running, right? For elevation, the user selects elevation. The user selects some challenge here. They put 11,602 feet, as we had in our test. For number of weeks to challenge, they put in 5. And they select calculate challenge. And it updates, right? And this is the same result we got from our test earlier, 2302, or 2320, sorry, right? If I change it from elevation to distance, it doesn't change it. Something else is happening there. Let's see what's happening. It should change. Actually, No, it didn't change it. So we have one bug, let's fix it. So when they use the toggles, I don't think we have a function for that yet. We never dragged a function for that. We never dragged an action for the, we gotta drag an action, one more action, guys, for the segmented control. Segmented control doesn't have an action. How else will the view controller know? It doesn't know. Okay, so let's get back to our assistant editor. Get back to your assistant editor. Get back to your storyboard. And we need an action for our segmented control. Amini, I thought you told me that. Amini, are you still here? Okay. It's yours probably working too. Okay. Everybody, segmented control needs an action, right? Do we agree? Right? When the user changes that, we want to update our UI. So let's control drag from the segmented control over to our view controller. And we will change our type to UI segmented control. And we'll say segmented control changed. Where am I? I'll go back to my view controller. I'll close out of the assistant editor. Segmented control changed. So right here, what do we want to do? We want to just update our current challenge. So current challenge, update current challenge state, right? So current challenge equal to, we create a new challenge, type. Oh, I need to update this. 1 second. Let's update that. Let's update that before I update this here. We'll make our current challenge enum an int so that we can make a raw value out of it. This guy, update your enum to be int. What are we doing here? We're simply saying distance now is 0, elevation is 0, is 1. Right? So this is using raw values. Yeah, distance, right? Did I mix it up? Sorry, let's fix it up. Elevation, thank you. So elevation is 0, distance is 1. That way we could create an enum from the segmented control itself. From the index itself, we'll create a case, an enum case from that. So the user selects 1, we'll create a case using the raw value of 1. So make sure you updated your challenge type, elevation, and distance, right? And let's keep going down. Challenge here is, we create a challenge. Challenge type, using a raw value here. Where am I getting the int value from? It needs an int. How can I get the current value of the segmented control? We have the segmented control here, it's sender. Sender.tag would be what? Sender.tag would be 0 at all times. That's just a view. But the segmented control itself has a property on it that tells us what index was selected. What's that property called? Google guys, Google. You're in an app, you're working on an app, you want to get to the current selected index of that segmented control. We've used it before. Selected, very good. Thank you, May. So here I'll say selected segmented index. That's an integer. It tells us what index was selected. The default is 0, that's where it starts. When the user goes to the second, that's index 1. Everybody? Cool, so this is how we create it. But this is not all. We need to go one step further here. Let's see what the compiler says. Compiler says value of this is an optional. It is an optional because maybe that case doesn't exist. Do we agree? Anytime you're making an instance of an enum from a raw value, that value is an optional. Because if I put in index 5, does that exist? Do we have 5 segments? No, we don't. So that's nil. That's going to return nil. So you want a nil coalesce here. We'll nil coalesce it with a challenge type. And our first challenge type, elevation, right? We'll just default it to elevation here. So what are we doing in that particular line of code? The user selects one of the 2 segments. We update our current challenge. Anytime we update our current challenge value, our did set gets called. It calculates again, and it updates our message label, right? So let's test our code again. And let's see if all works as advertised. Look at that, 1 o'clock. Okay, so app runs, user enters a metric here, 14,000 feet, put in 6 weeks, calculate challenge. It says 2333 feet, correct? And let's see if it changes the distance to miles here. It changes it to miles, right? So that works. Our segmented control works. It only changes what metric it is. Is it miles or is it feet? Everybody? Move it a little. Let us move here. Let me zoom up a little bit. Take it out here. Any particular line of code you want us to go over before we conclude the lecture? We've seen many of those concepts before. Anything new today was testing. Testing was everything that we saw new in testing. In the particular view controller we are right now, we've seen all those concepts. Anything you want us to go over? Yulia, please tell me. Is it everything? Everything. From view controller, from class view controller, confirm. Okay, let's go over it. I'll just take everything out. Let's go over everything. So, top down, we have our view controller, right? We have 4 outlets. We connected those outlets. We have a current challenge variable. We said anytime that variable changes, the did set gets called. Everybody, the did set gets called. Our calculate challenge function gets called again. It calculates the challenge here. It updates our labels. Okay? So that's that part. The calculate challenge is a function. We wrote a function to calculate the challenge based on what the user entered. Based on what's in the text field, it grabs those 2 text fields. It passes the metric, it passes the number of weeks to our function in the challenge.swift file. It gets us an output. The output is the average for the week. That output, we use string interpolation to put it in the message label, right? We switch on the current challenge. Why do we switch on the current challenge? Just to get either feet or miles printed out. Okay? We could use different use cases there, but that's why we switched on it. Right? What segmented control is currently selected? Based on that one, show the user feet or miles. The last part we did not do yet was the segmented control. We forgot to connect the segmented control to our view controller. So the minute the user changes that segmented control, we get an update. What do we do in that update? We say, go ahead, take in, whether it's 0, 1, over here, it's either 0, 1, either it's index 0 or 1, right? From those values, we create a new challenge type. We had to stop there. We had to say, hey, go ahead and update our enum to make it a raw value. Why? That way we could create a case from that raw value. And the why is here. The why is because sender has a selected index, which happens to be an int. So now we could use that int to create a new challenge type. And by forces of the return value being optional, we have to give it a default value because it could be nil. In that case, if it's nil, just return the first index, or just make the first index that challenge type. Any other questions? Yes.
So that the current challenge being challenge type runner is basically just taking the number and putting that back into itself just to change the
Just to make our type, our current challenge type, because our current challenge type is not an enum. I mean, it's not 0 or 1. It's not an integer. It's our own custom type enum challenge type.
right, and all of the changes in the sentence.
Yes. Yeah. That's only the sentence. We might have more logic later where we're doing more things there, right? Maybe we're showing them an elevation map. Maybe we're showing them a distance map. Whatever it is.
So it basically does the, okay, but it doesn't do the functioning. So how does it change the type of it? It's not doing the functioning.
It updates the current challenge type. Either it's an elevation type or a distance type.
So either way, it's going to say the only difference in the type is the one that's
Yeah, that's the only difference for now. Cool? Any other questions before we stop here? Yes, Mel. The label is not updating. Make sure your switch statement, the switch statement is where we're doing the update of the label. Just message label that text in your calculate challenge function. And by the way, guys, I want to point it out, but that should be its own function. That's a side effect, what I said earlier. That's a side effect, right? Because calculate challenge says what? Calculate challenge, right? I should have like an update UI or something here. Everybody sees that? Please, just keep that in mind. Cool. Any other questions? Going once.
What other reason
Oh, I'll come over to yours to see what's going on right now. Any other questions? Yulia? No, I said line 46 to 54. Line 46 to 54, we could take it into its own function. Oh, what with the testing we did today? The testing we did today validated our function here, our calculate weekly training function. We know it works because right now, if I say 0, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to crash my app. Yeah, that particular function. We could do more. We could add more stuff there, but we have our functions. We could add more. I could have one of the functions we didn't add in the UI is show me how many, if I say I have 3 days to work out, show me my average. We do not have that in the UI yet, but we have it in the function. The breadth, the heavy lifting of that particular lesson was not the UI today. It was the testing part of it. And the testing part of it, we didn't just test the calculate weekly training function. That's one of the functions we tested. But we also, if you go back to your testing suite here, we tested more things, right? We tested calculate weekly training, which is what we did. We also tested calculate daily metric. We haven't added that to the UI. Right? Everybody, we haven't added that to the UI. You could very simply add it to the UI, add a new view controller where the user sees, if I enter 3 days, what's my average? Cool? But again, the heart of it was not for the UI, it was for the testing part. Cool? You could test all your code first, and then the UI is the UI at the end of the day, right? It's just the heavy part of it, the logic, is tested already. It's good to go. Just putting them together is the UI. Cool? Okay, so we'll stop here.